Most people struggling to grow their arms aren't necessarily doing the wrong exercises because growing your arms and training your arms is pretty simple, but more so they're lacking a repeatable, reliable structure that can guarantee results over long periods of time. So today I am going to share with you my favorite structure for arm training. I'm going to lay out a week of training for you, and I'm going to go over specific exercise examples of exactly what I've been doing the past few months, and I've seen some significant gains, if I do say so myself, over the last couple months. So overall, the structure of an arm day that I do is 5 exercises. 2 for triceps, 2 for biceps, and then 1 for the sort of other elbow flexors, namely the brachioradialis and the brachialis. And so each day has 5 exercises, and I do 2 days per week. And each day is spaced roughly 3 days from the other. And so the days that I choose to do this on are Tuesday and Friday, but you can pick whatever 2 days make sense in terms of just overall recovery. I will also touch on volume and effort later on in the video, so stay tuned for those. So for each day, let's start with just going over the structure of each day. So the first exercise of the 5 is just going to be any triceps extension. Notice that I say any triceps extension. It could be the one that I'm showing here with a rope. It could be with a straight bar. It could be with a machine. It could be any number of different other options. Just as long as your arms are at your sides and you are extending your elbow against resistance, thumbs up for you. One thing that I would like to point out about these types of variations is that I like to start out the day with them in particular because I like to emphasize the squeezed position first. We'll see something that's kind of mirrored in my biceps training as well. And the reason I like to choose to do the squeeze position exercise first is just because it's a little bit easier on the elbow joints in particular. And in my experience, I like to do exercises that kind of give me a good pump before ones that promote a stretch emphasis. That's just my preference. You can trial and error that for yourself, but that's kind of what I like to do. So any exercise where the arms are by the sides and you're extending your elbow, thumbs up for you. And again, in particular, I like to emphasize the bottom position of these reps, whether it is a rope extension or a straight bar or some kind of machine. Now, the next exercise that I'll do is a biceps exercise. And the biceps exercise, as you might predict, will mirror the triceps exercise. And so principally what that means is 2 things. Number 1, it means my arms are by my sides. So see this variation here, this cable curl, my arms are right at my sides, if not maybe slightly behind my body. And I'm doing a curl specifically that emphasizes the top portion of the range. When I say emphasize, I really just mean that it's most challenging in that position. So the triceps exercise that we talked about first is most challenging when my elbow is straightest. In other words, when my triceps are shortest. And then this curl variation is going to be most challenging when my elbow is more bent. In other words, when the biceps are shorter. So right off the bat, you can start to see just that the biceps and triceps exercises, they simply just mirror each other in some kind of principled way. So I start off with the day, each arm day, with 1 exercise where my arms are at my side for triceps, 1 exercise where my arms are at my side for biceps, and again, you can argue just slightly behind my body. This version that you're seeing here on the screen is a little bit of an odd one just because of the setup, but don't get the setup confused with anything that's complicated. Rules of thumb for any curl is I basically just like to have something behind my elbow, and that's pretty much it. Whether it's a cable, a dumbbell, or a machine, you just fix the elbow to something that can support it. You do the curl. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward, right? And then guess what? For the third exercise, you're going to go back to another variation for triceps that is just an overhead extension. Now, I do want to make a note on overhead extension, particularly with the rope. A lot of people will set the origin of the cable way too low. So they basically are setting up, they're trying to use an amount of load that's appropriate for them to actually triceps extend, but the cable is so low that they basically have to do like some sort of gymnastics tricks to get into the motion. When the cable is set higher appropriately, somewhere just above the ass is roughly a good starting point if you're using like a normal size rope. Then you just basically squeak yourself underneath of the cable. You do a little bit of a bend and you get into the movement. One thing I will say that I think is hugely important is this beginning portion. So notice that right before I actually get under the rope, I'm actively pulling on the rope a little bit with both my hands in this direction so that there's tension on the rope. You just want to make sure that there's kind of an even distribution between either hand so that when you go around, you flip yourself around, you're not basically just, screwing up the extension right from the beginning. You don't want to have like, 60% of the load in one of your hands and 40% of the load in the other. And you can see that I also kind of reset that just right before I do the motion, right? So I do this little wiggle. I'm actively pushing up against the rope on either side to make sure it's in the right position. And then I start the motion. Again, much like the other variations I've listed, implement not super relevant. Pick the one that you like. I love to use a rope. I love to do this single arm as well. And we'll talk about kind of what I will mix up on either day because, again, I mentioned I have 2 arm days. So overhead extension is next. And I like to, with the rope, just pretty much milk out the bottom end of the range. Why? Well, because this is a more stretch focused variation. It's naturally kind of set up that way. So hopefully you can start to see a pattern here where the first 2 exercises, they are squeeze focus. And then the second 2 exercises are going to be more stretch focus. So this overhead extension is the stretched version, the stretch focused version, because I'm mainly just using a range of motion where the elbow is more bent. Whereas the triceps extension that I started with, I was really milking out just that bottom elbow straightened position of the range. Even though I do like to do those partial reps toward the end of a set, I do find that just pausing toward the end of the rep to squeeze position really will emphasize that portion anyhow, right? If you wanted to make the extension at your side, where your arms are at your sides, more of a stretch focus and just focus on the portion of the range where your elbows are more bent, you could do that as well. Just increase the weight and use that end of the range. And then the last biceps focus exercise, or the second biceps focus exercise, is just one where your arms are either in front of your body or up and out to the sides. And so much like the triceps extension variation differences, the biceps variation differences are basically just those where, in one variation, arms are at the side or behind the body. And then the other variation is arms are kind of up in front of the body or up and out to the side. Basically just arms close or arms away from the body. Preacher curls are probably my favorite go-to variation of this. And one thing that I do want to point out, if you are going to use a machine, if you have a machine, is just take note of the grip that I have here. I like to use a pretty much a false grip. And I also like to scoop myself up in the seat if I'm focused on a stretched version of this variation. If I were focused on a more squeeze focus, I would change the orientation on the machine. I'm not going to make this a whole tangential video on the mechanics of how to set up a preacher curl to make it more stretch focused, but the shortest possible version that I can give is just set yourself up a little bit higher on the pad, and what this will do to the mechanics of how you're pulling on the handle will pretty much make it harder in the bottom. That's not a guaranteed thing because different preacher curl machines are different, but just know that much in the same way I was emphasizing the more elbow bent position of the overhead triceps extension, I was emphasizing the more elbow straightened position of this curl, right? So if I go to the end of this set here and you're looking at where do I fail, I pretty much fail in the bottom and I basically get no partials. And so far you can see that the algorithm is pretty reliable, right? It's 2 triceps exercises. One is more of a squeeze focus. One is more of a stretch focus. Doesn't really matter which one is arms at the side or overhead, although in most practical terms, the one that is going to be with your arms at your side is going to be the one that's easier to make the squeeze focus. The one that's overhead is going to be easier to make stretch focused. In general, there are exceptions to that, but those are the general rules. And then in the case of the biceps, same thing applies. Tends to be easier to make the squeeze focus one, the arms at the sides, and the stretch focus one, the one that's more of like a preacher curl style. So already you have 4 exercises. What is the 5th one? Well, it's just one, as I mentioned earlier, for the non-biceps elbow flexors, the brachioradialis and the brachialis. Obviously, those are the only other 2. If you're unfamiliar, maybe that's not obvious. But it's basically just a hammer curl, and I like to do hammer curls with a rope. You can also do these with a dumbbell. Will there be biceps involved, especially because if you're doing this last, your biceps will be quite fatigued? Yes, absolutely, 1000%. Now, overall, this is the format, right? It's just 5 exercises, 2 for triceps, 3 for the elbow flexors. Do you need the hammer curl? No, not necessarily, but because my arms and my forearms are high priority, I'm adding those in. And also doing hammer curls can be beneficial for other reasons, just like making sure that all of your muscles are strong. If you're getting certain muscles strong and other muscles not as strong, that could be cause for concern. It might not be, but in my experience, people who are well-rounded tend to be better off in the long run. And who doesn't really want a huge brachioradialis or a huge brachialis? I mean, I certainly do. So those are the 5 exercises. And what I do for volume typically is 3 sets on all of those things. And so when I do those twice a week, and you add them up for biceps, I have about 12 sets. For triceps, I have about 12 sets. Now, the one thing that I would say is that your volume should be individualized, and your volume should largely depend on how you like to train and what kind of effort you're capable of and do like to put into your training. And so what you'll have probably noticed through just looking at all these videos is that I like to do all my sets to failure. So some of you may think that 12 sets a week is low. 12 sets a week is actually on the moderate to higher end of the volume spectrum if all of your sets look like my sets do. So if you are on the higher effort side of things, you train at or close to failure pretty much every set, then I think I would say anywhere from 6 to 12 sets as a starting point is great. And so if you've never had a kind of arm focused day and you're doing them twice a week and you're new, start on the lower end. Maybe just do, your first week, just do 1 hard set for each of these motions. And then maybe the next week, do the same thing. And the next week, maybe add a set, right? Just grade exposure to it slowly. Don't be an idiot. Don't be an asshole, or you're going to pay in the name of biceps tendonitis or triceps tendonitis or forearm ouchie or elbow ouchie, whatever you want to call it. So grade exposure slowly. Don't just jump into 12 sets to failure for each muscle group a week if you've not ever done this before, this kind of setup. Work into it slowly. What I will say as well, and this might be a question that just comes up, so I'll answer it before any of you ask it in the comments. I like to vary the exercises slightly between days. So for instance, on my first arm day, instead of doing a 2-arm rope push down for the squeeze focus, maybe I'll do a single arm cable push down. Instead of the 2-arm overhead extension, maybe I'll do a single arm overhead extension. Instead of doing a preacher curl with a machine, I'll do a preacher curl with a dumbbell. Instead of doing a face away curl with cables, I'll do a face away curl with dumbbells where my arms are anchored up against a wall or a preacher pad or something similar. So it's just, you're keeping the same formula, right? Arms at the side, arms not at the side, the squeeze focus and the stretch focus. And for me, it's just been such a reliable, sustainable thing, because I find that, especially when people start to convince themselves that like the stretch focus stuff is everything, not super long later, they tend to start to get elbow and forearm related issues. So I like to make sure that each session includes kind of one of each emphasis. And I just think that it makes sense to kind of make sure that the full range of elbow bending and elbow straightening is strengthened, and that different exercises emphasize different portions of that range. So I hope this video helped. If you want to learn more from me or support me in any way, check the links in the description. As always, I'll see you all in the next video.